You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. Now presenting Lawrence of Arabia. Thomas Edward Lawrence, born on the 16th of August 1888 and known as Lawrence of Arabia, was a multifaceted British figure who gained prominence as a result of his significant involvement in Middle Eastern affairs during World War I. As an archaeologist, soldier, diplomat, and author, Lawrence played a crucial role in the revolutions against the Ottoman Empire from 1916 to 1918, contributing to the Arab uprising and military campaigns in the region. His dynamic career, combined with his skillful writing, brought him worldwide recognition, which was later immortalized in the film Lawrence of Arabia, released in 1962. Lawrence's beginnings were unconventional. He was the illegitimate son of Sarah Junner, a governess, and Sir Thomas Chapman, an Anglo-Irish nobleman. The couple, not married to each other, and leaving Chapman's existing family behind, assumed the surname Lawrence. They eventually settled in Oxford, where Thomas was educated, ultimately at Jesus College, Oxford, with a focus on history. Prior to the war, he engaged in archaeology in the Middle East under the auspices of the British Museum. When World War I erupted, Lawrence volunteered for the British Army and was assigned to the Arab Bureau's intelligence division in Egypt. By 1916, he had embarked on reconnaissance missions in the Middle East and soon became embedded with Arab forces fighting for independence from the Ottomans. A key liaison and sometimes leader within this movement, he was instrumental in many military engagements, including the pivotal seizure of Damascus. Post-war, Lawrence served in the British Foreign Office and continued collaborating with Faisal, whom he had befriended during the conflict. Opting for a quieter life in 1922, he enlisted as a rank-and-file member of the Royal Air Force and later the Army, intermittently until his death. During this period, he penned 7 Pillars of Wisdom, an autobiographical work detailing his wartime experiences, alongside other literary endeavors. Lawrence's fame was amplified through the enthusiastic coverage of journalist Lowell Thomas and his own literary output. Tragically, his life was cut short at age 46 following a motorcycle accident near his home in Dorset on the 19th of May 1935. Part 1: Early Life. Thomas Edward Lawrence, more commonly known as T.E. Lawrence, was born on August 16, 1888, in the Welsh town of Tremadoc, in a house initially named Gorfwisfa, which is now referred to as Snowdon Lodge. Born into the family of an Anglo-Irish father, Thomas Chapman, who had abandoned his wife to start a new life with Sarah Junner, the governess of his daughters, Lawrence's heritage was unconventional. Sarah Junner was also born out of wedlock in Sunderland, delivered by her mother Elizabeth Junner, who was a servant dismissed during her pregnancy. Elizabeth claimed a man named John Junner was Sarah's father. Despite never legally marrying, Lawrence's parents lived as Mr. and Mrs. Lawrence, a name they adopted to conceal their true identities. In 1914, Thomas Chapman would come into an inherited title, becoming the Chapman Baronet of Killua Castle, an estate in County Westmeath, Ireland. Thomas was the couple's second of 5 sons and was affectionately called Ned by those close to him. The Lawrence family moved around a fair bit, residing first in Scotland, then on to the Isle of Wight, followed by the New Forest, Brittany in France, and then Jersey. Between 1894 and 1896, they settled in Langley Lodge in Hampshire, a secluded home surrounded by woodlands where Lawrence enjoyed numerous outdoor activities and seaside excursions. The summer of 1896 saw the Lawrences relocating to Oxford, setting down roots at 2 Polstead Road, where they would stay until 1921. It was here that Thomas had a wooden shed in the garden where he would study during his teenage years, a structure which remains standing to this day. Lawrence was educated at the City of Oxford High School for Boys from 1896 to 1907, receiving the honor of having a house named after him. Sadly, the school closed in 1966. He and one of his brothers took on roles as commissioned officers with the Church Lads Brigade at St. Aldate's Church. Lawrence has been noted as suggesting he had once fled from home in 1905 to join the Royal Garrison Artillery at St. Mawes Castle in Cornwall. His claim included serving briefly as a boy soldier before being discharged after his family bought out his commission. However, there is no official military record to substantiate this part of his story. Part 2: Travels, Antiquities, and Archaeology. As a teenager, Lawrence embarked on exploratory bike trips with his friend Cyril Beeson across the counties of Berkshire, Buckinghamshire, and Oxfordshire. They were keen on the history of each village's church they visited, taking impressions of the brass plaques found there. The duo was also vigilant at construction sites in Oxford, ensuring that archaeological finds were handed over to the Ashmolean Museum, which praised their dedication to preserving heritage in its 1906 report. During his summers between 1906 and 1907, Lawrence's excursions took him across France on two wheels, collecting information on medieval fortresses and impressing locals with his command of the French language. From 1907 to 1910, during his tenure at Jesus College, Oxford, Lawrence's academic focus was on history. He embarked on an extensive solo bicycle trip throughout France, reaching the Mediterranean to study its castles. Another of his ambitious travels during this period was a grueling solo walking tour to examine Crusader castles in Ottoman-ruled Syria. His time at the college included active participation in the officers' training corps, and he topped his class with his thesis that drew from his hands-on castle surveys. An escape from conventional English life, his deep dive into medieval history reflected a personal escape, as noted by his brother Arnold in 1937. Post-graduation, Lawrence embraced the role of an archaeologist at the Carchemish excavation site, thanks to a scholarship from Oxford and the British Museum's support, which was organized by D.G. Hogarth. After brushing up on his Arabic and Byblos, he joined the Carchemish project alongside notable figures like Hogarth, R. Campbell Thompson, and Leonard Woolley, until the advent of World War I in 1914. It was a formative period, marked by interactions with distinguished contemporaries such as Gertrude Bell, a brief stint with Flinders Petrie in Egypt, and a brush with inter-team tensions at the excavation site due to competing interests with a German team engaged in railway construction. In early 1914, a covert military mission disguised as an archaeological survey was undertaken by Woolley and Lawrence in the Negev Desert, officially sponsored by the Palestine Exploration Fund. This mission had dual purposes: to investigate a biblical locale and to map the region with an eye for military intelligence. While their work led to an official archaeological publication, the key outcome was the strategic military mapping, which included identifying vital water sources. During this time, Lawrence also explored strategical locations near Petra, such as Aqaba and Shobek. Part 3: Military Intelligence. Lawrence did not join the British Army right when the war started in August 1914. Instead, he waited until October to enlist, following advice from S.F. Newcomb, and he started off as a temporary second lieutenant interpreter. By the end of 1914, at the invitation of his former mentor David Hogarth, Lawrence moved to Cairo to work with the Arab Bureau, headed by Gilbert Clayton and under the oversight of Henry McMahon, the High Commissioner of Egypt. During 1915, tensions were high as the Arab nationalist movement was gaining momentum within the Ottoman Empire. Many Arabs in the Ottoman military were in contact with Sharif Hussein of Mecca, who was bargaining with the British to lead a revolt against the Ottomans if they supported setting up an independent Arab nation, including regions like the Hejaz, Syria, and Mesopotamia. This uprising would help Britain by reducing pressure on the Suez Canal. However, the French, who envisioned Syria as a French colony, and the government of India, which had aspirations for Mesopotamia and wanted to keep its base at Aden, both opposed these plans. At the Arab Bureau, Lawrence worked on mapping, intelligence reports, and prisoner interviews. He supported various strategies such as a British landing at Alexandretta and the idea of an independent Arab Syria, but his ideas did not materialize. By October 1915, the situation escalated as Sharif Hussein threatened to align with the Ottomans if Britain didn't commit to his demands. The British, struggling in the Gallipoli campaign, responded through McMahon in a way that was mostly positive but vague on key points like the Mediterranean coast and the Holy Land. In early 1916, Lawrence was sent to Mesopotamia with the task of aiding the embattled siege of Kut, possibly through inciting an Arab uprising or bribing Ottoman officers, but his mission didn't achieve any substantive results. During this time, the Sykes-Picot Agreement was being secretly worked out in London, which promised much of Syria to France and suggested that the Arabs would need to capture key cities to establish their own state. The extent of Lawrence's knowledge of the agreement during this period is not clear. Part 4: Arab Revolt. In June 1916, the Arab Revolt commenced, but it quickly became stagnant after initial victories, raising fears that Ottoman troops might recapture Mecca by moving along the Red Sea coast. In October of that year, Lawrence was dispatched to Hejaz, directed by Ronald Storrs to gather intelligence. He assessed the sons of Sharif Hussein, Ali, Abdullah, and Faisal, determining that Faisal was the most suitable leader for the revolt. Owing to the urgency and before the appointed S.F. Newcomb could take up his post in November as British liaison to Faisal, Lawrence stepped in. By the end of December, Faisal and Lawrence had formulated a strategy that posed a threat to the Syrian railway and checked the Ottoman troops near Medina. Upon Newcomb's arrival, there was an urgent request from Faisal to retain Lawrence permanently. Lawrence played a vital role in both strategic planning and acting as a bridge with British forces, and he fought personally in various battles across 1917 and 1918, including attacks on Ottoman rail lines and strongholds, ultimately leading to key victories and earning him significant military honors. The strategy crafted by Faisal and Lawrence focused on bypassing the seizure of Medina and extending the revolt northward towards Damascus. They opted against engaging the Ottomans in conventional warfare, favoring guerrilla tactics. The approach involved striking at the Hejaz railway while keeping it operational, thus straining Ottoman resources. Despite some dissent over the strategy's merit, it aligned with the intent of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which conditioned Arab independence in Syria upon them liberating the land themselves. In capturing Aqaba, Lawrence collaborated with Arab forces and Auda Abu Tayi, bypassing the well-guarded coastal paths in favor of a surprise attack from the land. The substantial victory at Aqaba in 1917 enhanced Lawrence's influence and prompted General Sir Edmund Allenby, head of the Egyptian Expeditionary Force, to adopt Lawrence's approach. Lawrence also shared the harrowing experience of being captured and assaulted by Ottoman forces in Deraa in November 1917. This incident reportedly had a profound impact on him and may have shaped his later behavior. However, the validity of his account is debated among scholars. Although Lawrence was not present for the formal surrender of Damascus in October 1918, he had a significant role in setting up a provisional government there with Faisal as the head, envisioning Damascus as the heart of an independent Arab nation. This vision collapsed in 1920 after French troops took control of the city. Throughout the war, Lawrence attempted to persuade British leaders of the benefits of Arab independence, but was constantly hindered by the conflicting Sykes-Picot Agreement, which promised the land to France and Britain, thus thwarting the Arab aspirations that Lawrence had championed. Part 5: Post-War Years. After achieving the rank of full colonel, Lawrence returned to the UK, and immediately after World War I, he joined the Foreign Office. He participated in the Paris Peace Conference from January to May as part of King Faisal's group. On May 17, 1919, the airplane transporting Lawrence to Egypt crashed in Rome. Both the main pilot and the assistant pilot perished, while Lawrence survived with injuries including a broken shoulder and ribs. During his hospital stay, the Italian King Victor Emmanuel III paid him a visit. Lowell Thomas, an American journalist, met Lawrence in Jerusalem in 1918. Captivated by Lawrence's mystique in his Arab clothing, Thomas and his cameraman Harry Chase extensively documented Lawrence's exploits. Thomas created a multimedia production called With Allenby in Palestine, which was initially staged in New York in March 1919, and later in England at prestigious venues through the personal invitation of the king. The initial show focused on General Allenby's engagements, but Thomas quickly realized that the photos of Lawrence intrigued the public more, leading to a larger role for Lawrence in later iterations of the show, eventually rebranded as With Allenby in Palestine and Lawrence in Arabia, which became a sensation and catapulted Lawrence to fame. Although Lawrence assisted with the show, he later expressed regret over his involvement. Lawrence served as Winston Churchill's advisor at the Colonial Office starting in February 1920 for just over a year, a role he disliked, as he indicated in his correspondence. He returned to the Middle East several times and wrote for prominent newspapers, pushing his and Churchill's plan for the region. In France, Lawrence was unfavorably viewed as an antagonist stirring Syrian opposition to French governance, but some historians argue that the primary issue was Syrian resistance to French rule, not Lawrence himself. Intrigued by the effectiveness of air power during the war, Lawrence enlisted in the Royal Air Force under an alias in 1922, but was expelled after his true identity came to light. He soon re-enlisted in the Royal Tank Corps under a new name deriving from his association with George Bernard Shaw. Still yearning for the RAF, he rejoined in 1925 and was stationed in British India until 1928, when rumors of espionage forced his return to Britain. While in England, he acquired land in Chingford, where he built a hut and frequented the site. Continuing his service at various RAF bases, Lawrence played a significant role in enhancing the RAF's air-sea rescue capabilities by advocating for faster and more efficient rescue craft, collaborating with Hubert Scott Payne. He enjoyed his service, leaving only when his term ended in March 1935, despite indications of the government's interest in involving him in national defense amid rising tensions in Europe. Winston Churchill later praised Lawrence for his foresight in recognizing the importance of air power and for dignifying his role in the RAF, which served as an inspiration to young men during a critical time. Part 6. Death. Lawrence was an avid fan of Bro Superior motorcycles, having owned 8 of them over time. His final SS-100, with the registration GW-2075, is in the hands of a private collector, though it has been displayed at both the National Motor Museum in Beaulieu and the Imperial War Museum in London. In 1934, demonstrating his passion for motorcycles, he rode more than 200 miles from Manchester to Winchester. He undertook this journey to see Eugène Vinaver, the person responsible for editing the Winchester manuscript of Le Morte d'Arthur, a text he greatly valued and often brought along with him. Sadly, Lawrence's life came to an abrupt end due to a motorcycle accident in 1935 in Dorset, not far from his home, Clouds Hill, near Wareham. The accident occurred 2 months after he left the military. While riding his Bra Superior SS-100, he failed to see a pair of boys on bicycles due to a concealed dip in the road. In an attempt to evade them, he lost control of the motorcycle and was catapulted over the handlebars. He succumbed to his injuries 6 days later on May 19th at the age of 46. A small memorial now marks the location of this tragic event. Following this incident, neurosurgeon Hugh Cairns, who was one of the attending doctors, initiated extensive research on the impact of head injuries on motorcycle riders, which ultimately led to the widespread adoption of crash helmets by both military personnel and the general public. Lawrence had purchased Clouds Hill from the Frampton family, who were his relatives. He used to visit Oakerswood House often and maintained a regular correspondence with Louisa Frampton. Posthumously, his mother made arrangements with the Framptons for Lawrence to be interred in their family plot within the grounds of St. Nicholas Church in Morton. His funeral procession included his coffin being carried on the Frampton estate's bier, and notable individuals like Winston Churchill, E.M. Forster, Lady Astor, and Arnold, his youngest brother, were among the attendees. Churchill spoke highly of Lawrence, remarking on the exceptional intensity and speed at which he lived his life. An inquest into Lawrence's untimely death was swiftly carried out, with discrepancies in the testimonies, particularly concerning a mysterious black car and the behavior of the bicycle-riding boys. Although there has been speculation, including theories of assassination, the prevailing view is that his death was accidental, due to the absence of concrete proof to the contrary. Part 7. Writings. Throughout his life, Lawrence maintained a prolific correspondence, frequently writing several letters daily. He was in touch with various prominent individuals like George Bernard Shaw, Edward Elgar, Winston Churchill, and many others. His communication included insightful remarks on the writings of Joseph Conrad, with whom he was acquainted. He also exchanged numerous letters with Shaw's wife, Charlotte. Aside from his written communication skills, Lawrence was linguistically talented, fluent in French and Arabic, and could read Latin and Greek. His literary contributions included 3 significant works, the most renowned being his detailed recounting of his experience during the Arab Revolt, titled 7 Pillars of Wisdom. His other works included translations of The Odyssey by Homer and a now largely unknown French novel called The Forest Giant. 7 Pillars of Wisdom stands as Lawrence's seminal text, a narrative rich with his wartime encounters, as well as explorations into military strategy, Arabian customs, and geography. Lawrence faced a daunting task rewriting the text 3 times, including a start-from-scratch effort after misplacing the original manuscript. Although the validity of certain accounts in 7 Pillars has come into question, Jeremy Wilson's biography of Lawrence has clarified some of these doubts. The book was sold at a loss due to Lawrence's dedication to not profiting from the Arab Revolt, a commitment that left him in debt despite the assistance in editing from George Bernard Shaw. Another contribution to Lawrence's literary legacy is Revolt in the Desert, an abridged adaptation of 7 Pillars of Wisdom, which he brought forth reluctantly. Despite its success as a bestseller, Lawrence resisted any personal profit from it and, through the creation of the 7 Pillars Trust, ensured ongoing revenue would support the families and children of RAF personnel in need. Lawrence decided to keep The Mint, a work reflecting on his time in the RAF, unpublished during his lifetime. Printed posthumously and distinguished by its stark writing style in contrast to the ornate prose of 7 Pillars of Wisdom, the book provides a raw look into the ordinary life of an enlisted man, as well as Lawrence's search for belonging within a greater collective. After Lawrence's death, his brother, A.W. Lawrence, managed his estate and the ensuing copyrights. 7 Pillars of Wisdom was eventually sold to an American publisher to cover taxes, while Clouds Hill and a selection of Lawrence's letters were entrusted to the National Trust. 2 trusts were established to manage the remaining aspects of his intellectual property. Over time, these trusts would amalgamate and direct funds from Lawrence's works to various charitable causes like the RAF Benevolent Fund and different academic, environmental, and archaeological endeavors. The legal control over Lawrence's writings followed the shifting sands of copyright law. The U.S. rights to 7 Pillars of Wisdom expired at the end of 2022, while in the UK, works published during his lifetime or shortly after passed into the public domain in 2006. However, works published more than 2 decades following his passing are protected until the earlier of 50 years after publication or January 1, 2040. Part 8. Published Works. A written appeal was presented to the Paris Peace Conference in 1919 by Arab representatives. T.E. Lawrence chronicled his experiences during the Arab Revolt in the book 7 Pillars of Wisdom, ISBN 08488-05623. For those seeking a shorter read, Revolt in the Desert offers a condensed version of Lawrence's detailed memoir, ISBN 1-56619-2757. Further exploring his life, The Mint reveals Lawrence's time with the Royal Air Force, ISBN 0393-001962. His scholarly work, Crusader Castles, gives insight into his Oxford thesis and was first produced by the Golden Cockerel Press in a limited print of 1,000 copies, ISBN 090274538. Lawrence also translated classic literature, including The Odyssey of Homer, released in 1932, ISBN 01950688181, and The Forest Giant, originally by Adrien Le Corbeau, which he translated from French in 1924. The correspondence of T.E. Lawrence has been curated and published in various collections, including one selected and edited by Malcolm Brown, ISBN 0460047337, another compiled by David Garnett, ISBN 0883558564, and a volume known as T. E. Lawrence Letters, the details of which are found in a prospectus by Jeremy Wilson. Lawrence's literary contributions extend to a collection titled Minorities, which he edited. It includes an array of poetry selected by Lawrence and featured an introduction by Jeremy Wilson in 1971 that interprets how the poems reflect Lawrence's life and thoughts. In 1929, he penned an entry on guerrilla warfare for the Encyclopedia Britannica. Together with C. Leonard Woolley, Lawrence co-authored The Wilderness of Zin, published in 1914. Lastly, Oriental Assembly, released in 1939, is another addition to T. E. Lawrence's array of works, contributing to his legacy as a writer and scholar. Sexuality. Discussions about Lawrence's sexuality have been extensive among his biographers and even extended to the mainstream media. There's no concrete proof that Lawrence engaged in voluntary sexual relationships with anyone. His friends considered him to be asexual, and he himself dismissed the idea of having any sexual experiences in various private correspondences. While there were insinuations of intimacy between Lawrence and Salim Ahmed, known as Dahum, his colleague at an archaeological site before the war, as well as with a fellow serviceman named R.A.M. Guy, these claims do not have strong backing among those who have studied his life. Lawrence's book, 7 Pillars, contains a poem titled To S.A., and although he never explicitly stated who S.A. was, speculation suggests it might refer to different individuals, both men and women, or even the Arab nation. A common belief is that S.A. might represent Dahum, who had reportedly died from typhus before 1918. Despite the hostile environment toward homosexuality during his time, Lawrence showed understanding toward man-to-man relationships, highlighting the naturalness and positivity he observed in some. He also discussed the notion of pure love between young male fighters in his book, hinting at sexual relationships as a means to satisfy physical needs without romantic involvement, and sometimes as an act of rebellion or self-punishment. Furthermore, evidence points to Lawrence having masochistic tendencies. He described experiencing a sexual pleasure during a beating in Daraa, and he later sought out beatings from a military colleague, alongside putting himself through challenging physical tests. Though one of the first writers on the subject, John Bruce, included dubious claims, it is widely accepted that Lawrence was prone to masochism. Novelist André Malraux mentioned Lawrence's inclination towards self-humiliation and aversion to conventional respectability, while biographer Lawrence James linked his behavior to homosexual masochism, pointing out his specific exclusion of women from his pursuit of punishment. Psychiatrist John E. Mack theorized that this masochism could be a consequence of childhood beatings imposed by his mother. Lawrence's brother Arnold believed these punishments were aimed at breaking Lawrence's will. Angus Calder, in the late 20th century, speculated that Lawrence's tendencies towards masochism and self-reproach might also be rooted in survivor's guilt, as he outlived his siblings and friends who perished in World War I. Part 11. Awards and Commemorations. Lawrence earned recognition for his distinguished service several times. On August 7, 1917, he was named a Companion of the Order of the Bath, and on May 18, 1918, he received the Companion of the Distinguished Service Order. The French government honored him twice, first with the Knight of the Legion of Honor on May 30, 1916, and later with the Croix de Guerre on April 16, 1918. His military accomplishments were highlighted by high-ranking officials: Sir John Maxwell on March 16, 1916, Sir Percy Lake on August 12, 1916, and Sir Reginald Wingate on December 27, 1918, through official military reports known as dispatches. Despite these accolades, when King George III attempted to bestow a knighthood on Lawrence on October 30, 1918, in recognition of his contributions during the Arab Revolt, Lawrence turned it down. He reasoned that accepting such an honor would be inappropriate given the perceived betrayal of Arab allies by the British government. In remembrance of his legacy, a bronze bust created by Eric Kennington was positioned in the crypt of St. Paul's Cathedral in London on January 29, 1936. This placed Lawrence among some of Britain's most esteemed military leaders. Kennington also crafted a recumbent stone effigy for Lawrence, which was placed in St. Martin's Church in Wareham, Dorset in 1939. Markers of Lawrence's past residences include English heritage blue plaques at both his childhood home at 2 Polstead Road in Oxford and his London home at 14 Barton Street in Westminster. Lawrence's legacy was further cemented in popular culture when he was voted as the 53rd greatest Briton in a BBC poll in 2002. In 2018, a century after the end of World War I, Lawrence's prominence was commemorated by the Royal Mint with a £5 coin, part of a 6-coin set marking the war's centenary. This set was released in both silver and gold versions.